Good morning, everyone. I am Jessie Whittish with Kentucky Youth Advocates. It's great to see all of you this morning. I'm really excited about today's conversation. I have a child who's going to be a kindergartner in the fall, and so I am really eager to hear this conversation about K-12 education, this kind of next phase with COVID. So just a reminder that we are recording today's forum as both a video and a podcast. So we ask that you stay muted, but if you have a question or a comment, please do drop that into the chat, and we can address those as we go or follow up with you later on that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry Brooks.
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Jessie. I still am recovering from, some of you regulars know that in late November, Jessie actually asked the question thinking that ham was parallel to turkey for Thanksgiving, which that's just such a mystery to me that anyone would even ask that question. So she is a big food, open Zoom with food person. So, hey, we are so happy to have you today. First of all, we want to thank Aetna Health. If it was not for their support, we would not be doing these. Secondly, this is, I believe, the 41st partner forum that we have done since the pandemic began. And as we always say, some of you are darn close to regular attendance pins, and some of you may be joining us for the first time. So we are just as excited to have those regulars as we are those new folks, and welcome. One other thing that I don't want to lose before we get into the topic at hand, because we always talk to you about this, this is ground zero in Frankfort. The General Assembly has reconvened. If you're paying attention, measures are moving with all due speed. I want to encourage you that whether it's early childhood or child welfare, juvenile justice, or K-12, please go to our website, look at the blueprint for Kentucky's kids. You'll be able to find a bill tracker, proposal summaries, calls for action. Now is the Super Bowl for advocates, so we're counting on you to be engaged. Jessie was saying off camera that today's topic has drawn an unusual number of folks. So you know that we have had congressmen and the governor on this, and we've had leaders from the Senate and House, and we've had many, many partners, but the topic today is hot. So we are really happy to have you, and you should be happy with the panel we have. We're so delighted to have Dr. Kish Cumi Price, who is a really core partner to KYA. Kish works at the Urban League and leads their educational initiatives there. Due diligence, because I try to be very transparent with people. KYA and the Urban League are working together right now to lay out what we believe are the strategic priorities for Jefferson County schools reopening. And so Kish is a great partner, wonderful thinker, experienced educator, and now a policy wonk. So I love that combination, Dr. Price. Sam Corbett is one of those guys that he is either a Renaissance guy or has the attention span of a gnat. I can say that because Sam's a good friend of mine, but Sam was a business leader in Kentucky for a long time. He also is a former school board member and school board chair. Sam headed up an education foundation, so he was in the world of philanthropy when it came to public schools. And currently, he's doing an amazing job of lifting up key educational issues as a member of the media. He has a series called Assignment Education, which appears on a local station in the Louisville market, but then appears statewide on KET. So Sam brings a very, very diverse perspective, very much of an on-the-ground perspective to the topic today. And Sam, I, like always, hesitate to compliment you, but we are really glad you're here. Our third guest was absolutely critical to this conversation because we could not possibly have every constituency within the educational sector on this panel, or we'd have 11 people. But when you talk to anyone in the world of education, they will tell you that the guy that brings a common ground to teachers and school board members, as well as superintendents and other school administrators, is Dr. Jim Flynn. Dr. Flynn is a practitioner. He's been an educator, including being superintendent. Currently heads up the Kentucky Association of School Superintendents. But again, I just want to emphasize that Jim's reputation is that when you hear him talk, don't think about just superintendents, because he's a guy who listens to teachers and board members and other administrators and parents. So Jim, Sam, and Kish, thank you so much for joining us today, and let's dig in. So the easy thing for me to do is frankly start with Jim. So I'm going to do the reverse because I want to let Jim and y'all hear sort of some external perspectives. And Sam, I'm going to start with you because I think that you're in and out of a lot of interesting circles, sort of established business leaders, innovators. You're in the world of philanthropy still. You're in the world of media. This topic of the pandemic in schools and reopening, and what I'm really interested in is what happens after reopening, that next chapter. You're in and out of those circles in unusual ways. I'm wondering if you could just share, what are you hearing? What are the concerns? What are the hopes?
Well, Terry, thanks for the invitation to join the discussion this morning. And I would answer your question with one word, well, maybe 2 or 3 words: a high level of frustration on everybody's part, particularly people both inside educational systems and people who are consumers of educational systems, so students, parents, grandparents, other family members, business people. As Terry mentioned, I was in a family business most of my career for 40 plus years, and we hired a lot of entry-level people. And if those folks couldn't come to work, in this case, maybe because they had issues with their children at home using NTI, then that was a major problem for us at the office. So quite simply, high level of frustration and a willingness to find solutions that obviously will protect everybody in the school building, be it adults, children, but at the same time get back to something that resembles what we all remember from now a year ago as the way we did school.
Okay, thanks. Kish, if Sam talks business leaders and kind of that level of community, I know that you talk from a perspective of paying a special attention to vulnerable families and vulnerable kids, whether that vulnerability is based upon zip code or the color of a kid's skin. So I know you have lots of perspectives on this. I'm wondering if you could share a couple key perspectives. Again, sort of that same frame that I asked Sam, your major fear and maybe a hope going forward.
Absolutely. And I would echo Sam in saying that most people, including students, right, are highly frustrated. Just not knowing is really disturbing. And this pandemic has been about that, just not knowing, not having any answers, families being concerned about the return and what that will actually look like. So in JCPS, when parents were polled about who would like for their children to return to school or not, the majority of the students who did not want to return are Black and brown families. And we know that the issues surrounding that are so complex. A lot of that has to do with not really having a true plan that has been understood or communicated and understood in a way that makes sense, right? So the hybrid model of going to school and for a couple of days and then being off, for some families, that's really disruptive to think of what happens during those off days as opposed to already having a rhythm and plan in place for the school year. Of course, we see that it may not end up being in the district's purview to really make that decision after yesterday's announcement from the governor, and not really sure where that will lead. But I think in the return, a lot of vulnerable families just want support and want to feel like they can trust the school district to provide that support for their children, that they won't be in a place of feeling like their children are being penalized for what the circumstances were during this period of time. And because we were not able to really have those social emotional supports and just wraparounds that a lot of families need, we know that we can expect that there's going to be a lot of issues that need to be dealt with when we return to school, whenever that is. And so I think the best way moving forward for us to be in a space of having trust in this process is to have a good plan in place.
Thanks, Kish. For some of you regular viewers, you know that we usually ask pretty discreet questions. I want to emphasize that I'm intentionally today wanting our guests to have some time to riff, because I think this issue is so complex that it doesn't lend itself to sound bites. And I say that because, Jim, I want you to have plenty of time. You've kind of heard the external perspective on schools. It's a lot easier for all of us, and I put myself as a grandpa of some public school kids in that category of I wish they do this, I wish they do that. My guess is it's a pretty complex picture. We have 170 some odd school districts in Kentucky. My guess is that there's 170 different stories as to how this is going. So from your position as a real state leader, can you first of all paint a landscape of what you think is going on out there? And then again, I want to give you the same opportunity to talk about as a seasoned and innovative educator, what do you most worry about, and what's your biggest hope moving forward?
Well, thanks, Terry, and I appreciated hearing the perspectives of the other two guests that you have on the panel today. And and I think back to last July, we had a convening of superintendents, and actually Dr. Lou Young, who's the chair of the Kentucky Board of Education, I'd asked Lou to come and speak to our superintendents as one of our guests that day. And I'll never forget, she said to our superintendents, she said, you've got a lot of options out there that you can choose. Unfortunately, none of them are very good. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where we've been, trying to figure out, what are the best paths forward given a situation where none of the paths are ideal or what we would like to be. And so what I have seen is that superintendents and their teams, their boards and communities, have really worked tirelessly to figure out what's the best path forward in their communities and their local context. I think one thing this pandemic has shown light on for sure is that a one-size-fits-all solution doesn't work. And so, what needs to happen in Jefferson County public schools, very different from what needs to happen in Pikeville or Ballard County, and places in between. But what I'm proud of is that our superintendents and their teams have have really doubled down and offered a range of services. We have districts out there, and many of you all know this, but they're offering everything from full in-person options to hybrid in-person options to fully synchronous virtual options to fully asynchronous virtual learning options and even fully remote in some cases where families don't have access to internet and that sort of thing. And they're trying to accommodate all these different needs out there, from parents and students who want full in-person to the parents and students that are still fearful to come back to in-person school. And so it's not been ideal. And I agree with Dr. Price. I think when we triage this situation and really look at the impacts, we're going to be astounded at all the different recovery needs, not just academic, but behavioral health, social emotional, all those needs are going to have to be addressed. And our superintendents have worried about that. And I think that's why so many of them have worked so hard to try to get kids back in school. And it's really been remarkable to think about what they and their teams have done. At the same time, we know it's not ideal, and that the costs are going to be considerable as we really reckon with, all the stuff that we're going to find when we really take a deep dive into all the impacts. And so, I just think each community needs to put their heads together. Multiple heads are better than one, and try to figure out the best way to get kids back in school. And I think another thing that's the pandemic has shown us is that while we can do classes online, we really can't do school, remotely the way American schools in particular integrate everything from the academics to the extra and co-curriculars to all the social, emotional, behavioral health supports that address the whole child's need and give our kids those hard skills and those soft skills that are so important in a successful life after school. And so I really do think each community's got to come together and figure out, how to deal with these adaptive challenges that we face. There's not a technical solution path that's going to answer these questions. These are all adaptive challenges that are going to require us to all come together and work together to find the best way forward for progress.
Jim, let me ask a follow-up question, because one of the things that I can't wrap my head around, and as you said, I think depending on where you live, you forget that in some places, kids have been going to school and they've been on playgrounds. I had a meeting this fall actually in Manchester, and as I was driving through Eastern Kentucky, I saw kids out in the parking lot playing kickball. In other areas of the state, they're not back yet. So I understand this is very iterative and very formative. As somebody who spent some time in schools, I think about things like the kid on the bus who shows up with a temperature, or that second grader, because second graders are going to throw up, whether it's post-pandemic or not. I think about my 17-year-old granddaughter, the challenge of socially distancing her. Just incredible. I'm wondering what you're hearing from a pragmatic perspective from superintendents who have been at it for a while. What's driving them crazy, and what is going surprisingly well right now?
Well, let me talk about what's going surprisingly well. One of the things that's been a remarkable success has been the schools and the vast majority of Kentucky schools have some form of in-person services, and many of them have done this since late August. And other than when the governor had an order to shut down in-person services, and one of the things that we're really proud of is that they were able to do so without contributing to the spread or any of the surge. it was really, there's compelling data out there that show actually school is probably one of the safest places to be, because they follow carefully all the mitigation strategies, of masking, social distancing, hand and surface hygiene. We're doing all the temperature checks and monitoring, and then the contact tracing portion. Now, the challenge has been, because of the constraints of in particular, quarantining, it's disrupted some of the in-person services because of the operational constraints, particularly around classroom teachers and bus drivers and other key personnel that are having to be quarantined. But I talk to superintendents all over the state. Most of that's been because of exposure outside of school, not in school. And so we're really proud of that. But it's also very challenging. The costs have been significant. When you think about the range of services that I just described, just on the on kind of really the educational program, much less the attempts that many of these districts have tried to build some kind of supports around the wraparound services that Dr. Price referred to, and that's been a real concern of ours. So we're really pleased of those success stories. At the same time, it's such a fluid environment where things change. And of course, unfortunately, it's become a very political issue as well. And those challenges have been immense as well. And so it's put our superintendents in perpetual catch-22s that no matter what they do, there's a bunch of people mad. And so, that's been challenging. But, you think about, I was talking to a superintendent who wanted to get students back in as soon as possible in August, because he felt like this is our best opportunity to build some relationships, make some connections, teach them how to use the remote learning strategies that they were prepared to implement should they have to shut down in person, and all that. And then he got him in, and he was like, oh wow, I remember he called me, he said, Jim, we can do this. He said, I just thought we could do it for a little while, and then it would probably fail, but at least we would have built those relationships and have those connections, and our kids would know how to do remote learning better. Because last March, when we did it on a dime, it was a real struggle. And so they worked really hard to make that happen, but then they found out they could. And but then now they're still just dealing with kids they can't find, kids that are disconnected, and then we don't yet know all the at-risk stuff. I saw an article in the Courier-Journal not long ago that talked about the number of fatal overdoses, and that there were more deaths due to fatal overdoses than COVID deaths. Mm-hmm. And not to discount the impact of COVID on so many folks and families, but it made me start thinking about, well, how many non-fatal overdoses have there been?
Ancillary facts.
Yeah. And then extrapolate that on into all kinds of at-risk behavior.
Yeah.
We're worried about.
Yeah, I want to pivot around 2 points that Jim made. Kish, I'm going to come back to you around some wraparound questions. But Sam, Jim made a really important point, which is we can dance around it, but this has become a very political issue. You're a pretty smart observer of political issues. And as you think about this, I guess now you're a member of the media. So as you look at that, not just in your local community, which is Louisville, but from a statewide basis, what surprised you, what concerns you? How would you describe the political dilemmas that Jim referenced, that school board members, that superintendents, that county leaders? Talk a little bit from your perspective about what you see going on there, because I think it's part of a much larger national narrative.
Well, it's it's almost as if we have, and this might not be the right choice of terms, but it's almost as if we've weaponized going back to school with the different political parties. That Party A might use their position in opposition of Party B. And so where obviously the focus should always be on the students, and at the same time, the student's family, now we've turned it into a real ugly political war on, if you go back, what's that imply? We've drugged, fair or unfair, the teachers' associations into the conversation and tried to make them the bad guys, which is, I think, totally unfair. And so it to your point, Terry, it's really consistent, unfortunately, with what we're seeing in our political discourse nationally. It's almost as if, well, if you're for in-person learning, then that also means you support this and that. And if you're against it, well, then you must be a supporter of those bad teachers' unions. And it's just gotten to be, like a lot of things, unfortunately, really ugly, where the focus ought to be, what's the best thing we can do for our students? And as Dr. Price and I chatted about the other day, we're all concerned about these kids who a year ago were in the 4th grade and reading at a 2nd grade level. Where are they today? How much further have they slipped? How much more learning loss have we seen? And then the question is, to your point earlier, when we do all go back to in-person, how do we, to use Dr. Price's term, how do we triage this situation? Because I've got to be careful here, but a political statement, I don't think public schools play catch up real well. And even if they do, it's very, very expensive.
Yeah. Okay. Good observation. Kish, one of the things that everybody's talking about, which is a good thing, but I worry about proof in the pudding. And that is that I hear a lot of conversations around that the non-cognitive supports that students need, social, emotional. Jim referenced it, you've referenced it, Sam referenced it. I'm wondering if you could paint a picture for our participants today as to some examples that you at the Urban League hope to see. Again, taking it from that broad category that everybody can agree with to here's exactly an example of what we're talking about. So you're waving a magic wand. What are 2 or 3 things you'd like to see schools embrace to support that non-cognitive return to learning?
Great question, Terry. I would say, first of all, just a recognition of the family as experts and community partners as experts. So much of the, I won't say burden, but the lift was on families and community partners for a year plus. And so, I'll say a year, I guess. And because of that, it was a true diversion from what most families experience and what most school districts experience, which created this, I think, awareness on both ends of how critical family engagement and community engagement is for a student.
I think Kish is frozen, so I'm going to reserve the right to return to her. And I'm going to ask you a targeted question, Jim. It kind of related to what Sam had to say.
I know within.
Oh, okay. There we go. You got frozen a moment, so go ahead.
Where was I? Where did I stop? I mean, I'm not sure.
Well, go ahead. Just keep going here. Okay. Okay, Jim, I'm not good at technology anyway, so it's hard to shift this here. But one question, and this may be a little bit in the weeds, but you mentioned something, and I think it's so important. I'm confused who's making the decisions right now. I was on an email exchange, I'm sure you got it before I did, where the commissioner, and I'm going to make a statement, this is not a criticism, it's an observation. The commissioner sent out a note yesterday, late afternoon, saying, I've just been advised that the governor is going to make an announcement today. Is the governor making these decisions? Is the commissioner, local boards, everybody, depending on what it is? What are we going to see? Is that going to return to normal governance, do you think?
Well, we certainly hope so. And one of our strong advocacy points as a Superintendents Association is to keep the local decision-making context in place as much as possible. I think going back to even what Dr. Price was saying, engaging families and listening to what our families and our students, and listening to our teachers and staff that are in there doing the frontline work. Those people are the folks that can help you make progress on these, very difficult, challenging, complicated decisions that we have to make, trying to do the best we can in this environment. So, but that's been a moving target. The governor has, on occasion, made executive orders that have driven our decisions. And so certainly the Department for Public Health has, made decisions that have impacted how we do things. And so there's all those layers of a decision-making authority that have been at play here. And at times it's been a little bit of a moving target. But again, our preference is keep the local context and the local governance structure at the forefront as much as possible, because again, a one-size-fits-all solution has shown not to be the best. And so trying to make statewide policies
just doesn't fit.
Yeah. It doesn't always fit. So we got to be real careful with that.
Okay, Kish, we're going to see if you paid your Zoom bill and you came back, because we lost you. So let's try it one more time. Maybe I've jinxed you with the question, but so one thing you want to see is valuing parents and community partners as real team members. So what's another example that you hope you see to support the non-cognitive needs of kids as they return?
Yeah, so another way that I think we could be really instrumental in addressing needs coming through the door is really focusing on what we would call more of that social emotional assessment. Checking in with students to see how they're doing, really being deliberate about those check-ins, where a lot of us see that in, the classroom circles, and being able to have those opportunities for students to just reconnect with each other. And we know that there's requirements for, social distancing and wearing masks. So everything's going to look and feel different for students. And we need to be aware of that and really intentional about trying to engage them in their learning process, right? So not the hit them with tests as soon as they come through the door, or even being in a space where you're missing all of these assignments, let's catch you up, but more of a, how are you doing? Like just a true check-in, making learning fun, and being in a space where we're really focusing on what's important. Right. For me and the Urban League, what we've talked about extensively before the pandemic were these gaps in learning. Right. And those gaps are usually determined by standardized tests, which we no longer have, last year's data to be able to use as a cross-reference. But based on the announcement earlier this week by Biden's administration, that is now going to be mandated. And what that looks like for the district really matters to us, because we want to ensure that it is not going to, cause more undue stress for students and educators, but actually help in providing a way to really hone in on really what we're saying. Reading and math is those are our key focus areas, because we think if we can make gains in reading and math, specifically with our Black and Brown population, that will do wonders for them in moving forward. This is really a systems change that we're hoping for, but we know we haven't heard much about that. And so when you say magic wand, if I'm talking magic wand, I'm talking a whole turnover, right, of curricula, approach, communication, lines of communication being open. Those things take work, and I'm not sure if we're in that place to do that, but that would be our magic wand. And if I could say one more piece about this, what has happened in this period of time for a lot of Black and Brown families, and this isn't just JCPS, this is nationwide data, is that a lot of parents for the first time have been able to see or witness firsthand how their students interact with teachers, or how those teachers interact with their child, and have real major concerns about that, right? Being able to hear those tone changes in a synchronous learning environment, and hearing them talk, with warmth in their voice to other students, and then hearing them address their students and hearing the disconnect there. So I guess I want to uplift and highlight that we do have a lot of work to do, and the burden should not just be on educators, right? It's a system-wide approach, but everybody has to see themselves as a part of the system. We can't just have this nebulous, it's the system, and not connect the people to that. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. One of the things I appreciate about Sam, Kish, and Jim is they're very skilled at not just talking about problems, but they lift up solutions, which I have a strong bias toward. So I want to ask you this question, and we've got maybe if each of you could take 3 minutes or so, and then we'll stay on time. Let's think about fall, I don't know, what do you want to say, August 2025. And I have this hunch that when we think about schools in 3 or 4 years, first of all, I think they will be changed, maybe for good, maybe not, maybe as much as we want, maybe not. But I'm wondering, as you think ahead, get the crystal ball out, make your prediction, what is one thing that you hope schools resonate with, animate schools in the fall of 2025, that we can look back and say, as bad as the pandemic was, a positive came out of it, and that's the result of that is schools today are as opposed to before the pandemic began. So I really hate to just sequence it because I'm putting somebody on the spot. So Kish, Sam, or Jim, do one of you want to jump in with your 3-minute crystal ball prediction on that?
Well, I don't mind jumping in first.
Okay, thanks.
One of the things that we've been thinking about as superintendent leaders is that, every time there's any kind of a disruption, it's an opportunity for innovation. There are, remarkable, attractive alternatives out there that we can land on and make things better. And I think our superintendents and others in the education space are thinking about how can we make education better as a function of not just the pandemic, but the social and racial justice issues that we've been dealing with, and make it better for everyone. We hear those same stories that Dr. Price has shared. We hear those exact same things, and we know that we still have kids that are falling through the cracks and aren't being successful in our school. I also think that there's some wonderful opportunities for our public to understand the value of schools even more. Going back to, we can teach classes virtually or remotely, but you can't really do school and capture all those other things that make schools in America special and special places. And the other thing I think we can maybe gain some traction on is our obsession with standardized testing and high stakes accountability that actually now a roadblock to that personalization that we really need to get to. And I'm not offended by Sam saying we don't do interventions to catch up learning as well as we should, because what are we doing? We're facing the high stakes accountability in the testing on grade level, not meeting a child where they are, but saying, no, we got to get you as prepared for this test that you're supposed to be, And so maybe we're going to see a shift in some of that thinking, and maybe we're going to see a shift in families and business and industry realizing, schools are a lot more important to us, and we need to pay more attention and get more involved in helping them be what they can be. When I was a superintendent for 16 years, I used to remind our community that a community gets the schools it wants. If you want great schools, get engaged, get involved, and hold us to high expectations and help us deliver. And so that's my dream. We're going to find these innovations to make school better for every child.
Yeah, thank you so much for that thoughtful answer. Sam, since Jim referenced you, I'll go to you next, and then Kish, you get to benedict us on this question, okay?
Well, as terrible as this whole year has been, whether it's 500,000 Americans who have died, the impact on businesses, people who are unemployed, people who are really struggling, I kind of would follow up with what Dr. Flynn said. I think there are some very positive things that can come out of this. Number one, as a non-educator, I would tell all of you educators on this call, that clearly one of the things we've learned from this is to value teachers even more than we have before, because all of our parents and grandparents and others who are trying to help their kids learn via NTI have figured out how damn hard this is. And so if nothing else, we're finally, I think, or we're valuing our educators more than we have in the past. That's number one. Number two, just as Dr. Flynn suggested that schools need to try to figure out what positive things we can take away from this experience, those same conversations are happening in probably every business in the world, really, because it's been a worldwide issue, but particularly in the United States. So we've been doing school virtually in Jefferson County now for a year. When we go back to in-person, and we're now at 2025, as you suggest, Terry, I'll bet you we're doing some things virtually and expanding the opportunities. And Dr. Flynn, I wrote down your line where you said we can't do school online. We can teach classes, but we can't do school. I'm going to say that, and I'll always credit you. I really like that. But I think there are things that we've experienced and we've learned in the last year or so that we can incorporate into school looking forward. Again, one of the criticisms people have of schools is that in many ways we do school the same way we've done school for 20 or 50 or somebody said 100 years. Fair or unfair, is this an opportunity to be innovative, be proactive, and maybe try some things that we were a little hesitant to try in the past, but because of the pandemic, we've been forced to do?
Thanks, Sam. So Kish, it's August 2025. You're looking around and you're going, man, that was a terrible year, but here's one good thing that's happened for our kids in these schools. What's that going to be?
Yeah, I would say, I guess I took your earlier question about just what would I envision, 4 years out. And I think it would definitely be a true connection to students being able to see what they're learning in the classroom and how it applies to the community that they live in. And that does require a true shift in mentality. It requires, a change in approach. And if we're talking cradle to career mindset, we are looking to help kids. We were all kids once, right? And we remember being in class and saying, what does this have to do with anything? Why am I doing this? What's the point? And at some level, we have to recognize that kids are experiencing that today. And some of them, unfortunately, decide to just check out. I'm done. This doesn't make any sense. I don't see how it applies to my life. and I don't want any parts of it. And so the more that we can be intentional about that applicability, being able to have that application there is huge. And that means we do have to look at our curricula. We do have to figure out how we are being intentional about ensuring that students are getting a very holistic view of their world. And that just requires a true change. And it also means that we're talking about this engagement piece where schools aren't fortified, and there's more opportunity to be able to see how the walls of the school came tumbling down and we kept them down, right? Like that's the hope that I think we have definitely from the league, is being able to help students see how what they're learning applies to all facets of life, and specifically with our core principles of jobs, justice, education, health, and housing. If we can do that and we can find that way to like really tap into what students are interested in, we don't have to worry about all the other pieces that seemed so disconnected before. But if there's anything that happened during this period of time in unveiling and ripping off those Band-Aids, is that the Band-Aids were never working, and we need surgery, and we need to be intentional about that, and we need to be gracious about the process. Here's the news flash. Districts across Kentucky and the nation, there's no need to hold the community or families at bay to protect the schools, thinking that in some way, form, or fashion is keeping people from being critical of what's going on. We know what's going on. We know that 70% of our kids and vulnerable populations are not getting what they need. So let's just be honest about that and say we need to work together. If there's anything, there was so much burden put on families. I just want to hone in on that, guys. So much burden was put on families and community partners to step up and try to support students during this time. And if we're being completely honest, grading students right now is really a true grade and reflection of trying to grade a family's ability to be able to get their students to do something that was not ever designed to happen, right? And that is a huge equity issue when we talk about a family's ability to get all of their children engaged in the learning, however that happens to be at their particular school with that particular teacher. And then the grade is a reflection of that student's work or their ability. I don't think so. So we really need to think about how this will shift in the future. And I guess I'll end there, but I did want to give just a light story here. A student, I don't know if you all caught this in the news, but a more high school student here in JCPS just recently in a basketball game, right? He's a foster. Yeah, he's in foster care and just did a really, out of the box thing in giving the ball to the opponent, right? He gave the ball to a senior who had checked into the game late and had an injury. And that particular athlete had missed a three-pointer. And he gave the ball to that same student to be able to, get a layup. And when he was interviewed afterwards, I'm sorry, it's touched me, but he said, I felt like he needed a chance to score. And we just have to really understand the importance of all of our students being able to have and need that chance to score. And we have to set up the system to be able to provide that. So I'll end there, sorry.
Thank you so much. No, thank you so much. So Jim, Sam, and Kish, I just got to say I'm humbled. I'm really humbled that you guys joined us. Your thoughts were right on target. And I appreciate the advocacy that each of you in your own way give to kids. So thanks so much for joining us today. My colleague, Cortney Downs, I think is going to do the wrap up. So Cortney, I'm kicking it to you.
All right. Thank you, Terry. That really was a fantastic forum. So thank you so much to Dr. Kish Cumi Price, to Dr. Flynn, and to Sam Corbett for joining us today. The three of you really provided an important level of transparency and like internal and external perspectives around some really complex issues. And yet we still heard a lot of commonalities there. So we heard that there are frustrations from parents, from teachers, administrators, students, a lot related to just the unknown, which paths forward are the best, when none of the paths may seem ideal. And then in some cases, there's frustration that's compounded by environments that really aren't designed to thrive in NTI or other hybrid models. We also heard that there is a willingness to find solutions that can benefit everyone. Parents and teachers, they really want to trust the school system in the process to returning to in-person, but also prioritizing some improvements, right? Because we can't ignore the impact that COVID-19 has had on them or compounded. There are really strong recovery needs, academic needs, social-emotional needs. And as Dr. Cumi Price said, it could start with something as simple as just asking the kid, how are you doing? Right, so really prioritizing those wraparound services for students and families, and also prioritizing listening to what families and community partners have identified as their needs, and that's something that will be really critical. And then just to wrap it up, some of the positive things, it was really great to hear about that anytime there's a disruption, there's still that opportunity for innovation, that we're valuing teachers maybe more than we did before. And then again, the applicability. Students need to be able to see what they're learning in the classroom and then how it applies in the community. So again, thank you all for joining us. It was just a fantastic forum. We also want to thank Aetna Better Health of Kentucky for their continued support of today's virtual advocate forum. Next week, we will be discussing the solutions to address the digital divide in Kentucky. So we will be joined by Commissioner of Agriculture, Ryan Quarles, and we will also have representatives from Ohio Valley Education Cooperative and then other professionals who have come up with some pretty innovative solutions to bridge that gap for Kentucky kids and families. So as always, we will send a follow-up email with a recording from today's forum. If there's any additional resources, we will include that as well. And we will send you all the link to sign up for next week's forum. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.